Hi there, I'm Linda and this is Hutton's Valley Permaculture. Well, spring has sprung and with it lots of flowers, but is there anything that we can harvest? Today we're going to have a look at that, as well as plant out some of my new trellises, give a bit of extra support for my broad beans, and I'm going to get this garden ready and plant out some chilies. Well, from above my garden looks pretty full. There's lots of plants that are flowering and going to seed. We've had a fairly warm start to spring and then it turned cold again with lots of water. So it's kind of got things started and then slowed it down again. It should be warm enough to get a few seeds started, so I'm going to get them into the ground and I'm going to make a start on containing some of this wildness and get some plants in for summer. But before we do any of that, let's have a look around and see what could be taken out of the garden and into the kitchen. To start with, let's have a look at the garlic, which I planted back in April. Down this end of my garlic patch are my early plantings, and I think there was 4 different varieties, and then we move into some varieties that I planted later, and they will be also harvested later as well. Now you can see the difference there. They're quite tall and green, and these plants have really been affected by some rust. They are starting to get the garlic scapes on it, so we'd be able to harvest any of those coming through. But some are actually getting a bit of a lean-to on them, which in my mind generally means they're not far off actually being ready to harvest. Now I'm just having a bit of a dig around in the hole. You can see they're starting to bulb up, but I think they've still got a fair way to go. So we'll pop it all back in again and let that one go for another 4 weeks or so. But we'll be harvesting these garlic scapes very soon. Now just over from the garlic patch, I've got my strawberry patch, which has also got artichokes and asparagus going. And you can really see the benefits of putting down lots of manure and compost and mulch onto this bed. These strawberries have really kicked into life and they're just starting to produce some fruit. And with some warmer weather forecast soon, I'm sure these will ripen quickly. It's just a matter of beating the slugs and snails and blue-tongued lizards to them. Something else that's growing nicely in this garden is some asparagus. Now this one is just a really young asparagus, probably just a year or 2 old. I'm finding some of my younger plants struggle to get going, especially at this time of year with lots of slugs and snails in the garden with the conditions being so moist. While some of my older plants I've already been harvesting quite a few spears from, and I am letting some of it go to flower. I have a couple of different varieties. This one is a purple variety, and I have another one called Mary Washington, which is, I think, the green variety. We've already got little friends in the garden that I've got to watch out for. That's probably the same copperhead that I came across in July. Just wants to get out and get a bit of sunshine. So we might leave the asparagus patch to him or her and let it get some sun so it can be on its way. The Comfrey Border along the asparagus and artichoke bed is just coming to life, and I'll be harvesting that regularly through the growing season to stop it going to seed and spreading itself around, but also just to make the most of the beautiful mulch that it produces, and of course the nutrients that it can spread around as well. Also in this asparagus artichoke bed I have some chamomile. Lots of plants in this garden that I love to harvest for teas. Most of my artichoke plants are down the far end of that garden bed, and I've got the beautiful purple varieties as well as a green variety, and they've been in this location for a few years now, and you can really tell they're just really producing abundantly and the plants are huge. If you're new to clove artichokes and not sure what to do with them, check out my video on how to prepare and preserve them. You just have to be careful with these purple ones, they're very prickly. Back along the garden, we've got my carrot patch, which is mostly going to flower now. We've got some seed heads appearing over here, and that will be full of beautiful seeds in a few weeks' time. I will be leaving a lot of these carrots. They've already gone woody, and I've heard, look, there's some little ladybirds. I'm going to be leaving them because, well, let's face it, the insects love a bit of foliage to hide in. The more plants you let flower, the more genetic diversity you're kind of allowing in your seeds. There's heaps of ladybugs in here, and they're fantastic in the garden for keeping pests down. Just moving along through my garden, I've got lots of parsley coming here, a few snow peas, although the snails did kind of eat those down. And I did broadcast a lot of spinach seeds here, but they weren't viable. There's nothing that's sort of come of those, so I'll have to be planting something else out into this garden. And just here, I've got some purple radishes coming, along with a patch of daikon radish that's hiding in between my hollyhock plants. One of my hollyhock flower heads has fallen down, but it's still quite beautiful. That's what all the rest of them will be looking like when they eventually pop out. This is one of my so-called daikon radish, although I don't remember them being pink. They're home-saved seeds, so maybe they've crossed with some of the other varieties. But this big plant here is definitely the purple variety that I expected to have. They're actually nice and crunchy and sweet and really delicious radish. I have been contending with lots of this nasturtium that wants to get going in this garden bed as well. So lots of chop and drop with those little plants going on. Next to this trellis here is usually where I grow tomatoes. And it's still too cool. It's still a few weeks off, sort of 4 or 5 weeks even, before I plant any out. So I've got a few salad greens in, and I'm still letting my Tuscan kale go to seed. So that's sort of taken over, but it should produce seed before I need to do some planting. And as you can see, there's plenty of ladybird food here. They love to eat aphids. I've still got a few fennel in the garden that are worth harvesting, although a lot are sending up their flower heads and soon will turn to seed. But the bees and the insects love those flowers, so I do like to leave lots in the garden. I also find down this end of the garden, the borage sort of just spreads itself around, and it's great for attracting those bees in to pollinate. Moving along into the newer area of the garden, I've had a couple of problems to contend with. Firstly, escaping chickens keeping on digging up my seedlings, but also plants, the weedy plants breaking through my cardboard layer. All through these garden beds, I'm finding both the buttercup and the dock are pushing through my cardboard, which I really didn't have thick enough. You can see there's sort of signs of plants coming through here too, and I'm going to have to get through and just pull as much as I can before it all sort of takes over. But I've planted out some of these garden beds with some lettuce varieties, but you can see that's either a chicken who's pulled that off, or we've had some snails or slugs. And you can see those pests have also had a bit of a go at my bok choy too. I've still got several plants to move out of my area where I was raising seeds. This is a cabbage that I've yet to move on, so I've got to get that going soon. And some of my kale, that's a curly leaf kale and some Tuscan kale, so I'll try and get those moved on. Just here I've planted out lots of little pea plants, just for a potting pea. But they've had to contend with chickens getting in and constantly digging them up. And they're contending with the snails and the slugs, and also on with these huge big weeds that have been pushing through. So I've got, I don't know what, that's some sort of grass that's coming through. And I've got clover. The chickens have actually been digging through the cardboard layer, which means a lot of these weeds are taking off where they wouldn't be. You can see there's torn bits of cardboard there. But I do have an earlier patch which is actually starting to take off quite well now. Just leaving our pea patch now. We'll head down this way, and I've got a few beetroot that are ready to harvest. These ones haven't gone to seed yet, but they soon will be, so I'll probably be pulling most of my beetroot out and replanting some seeds. And just here I've got spring onions, as well as some more smaller beetroot plants. So hopefully I planted those late enough that they won't go to seed too quickly. Just down this end of my tomato bed, I've got an echinacea plant that flowered beautifully last season. It didn't die off during spring, so I figured that should send up some more flowers really soon. And just here, I've got the first of my tomato volunteers in the garden. Now, it was kind of a little red cherry size tomato, which was really good for just halving and dehydrating, and a really beautiful flavour. So I'll certainly be letting some of those plants grow. This California orange poppy are just a beautiful colour in the garden. Can't help but love my bees. The honey they make here is just delightful. Next to my garden trellis, I've got more lettuce greens. They really grow beautifully in these cooler months of spring. I've also got various potatoes growing. My Swiss chard is going to seed, but I have planted a few bean seeds already in here, which will hopefully start to germinate fairly soon. And I'll be clearing these lettuce plants out so that they can really get going. Also in this garden are some little icicle radishes. And I've planted some borlotti bean seeds, and they've been growing, but they have been consumed by the good old slugs and snails as well. And they could do with a bit more warmth to get them growing a bit quicker as well. This pathway needs a bit of clearing, but I've got lots of radishes flowering, and I do want to save some seed, but I should be able to clear some of those plants out. More Swiss chard seeding. And I've got a couple of cabbages that I planted in autumn that are finally starting to grow. So it'll be nice to have some cabbages. Haven't had some for a little while. And this is the fennel patch that I was talking about earlier. Masses of fennel in there, and I don't need all of it going to seed. So I will be clearing all of this, which will give me a bit of planting space for some zucchini. Just in this area of the garden, I've got a lot of my winter plants. The Swiss chard are going to seed. The sorrel will soon be going to seed, although I'm going to be chopping and dropping that or using it in the compost because I do not need any more sorrel plants around. I have snuck in a few little plants. I've got some Brussels sprouts that are starting to grow. And this is a red spinach, auric it's called, which is a really beautiful plant. I did start planting in some other brassicas, such as some broccoli and collie, but I think the snails are getting to those. Lots of self-seeding lettuce seeds in that garden actually, with a bit of sunlight. Some of these plants, when they go to flower, just look magnificent. Look at the colours on this red Russian kale. You got the purples, the greens and the yellows. It really looks magnificent. Plenty of celery in here, some of which is going to seed. Parsley going to seed. Over here is a mega Spanish radish that's going to seed. If we have a look down below, look at that monster. That is mega. And you can see there's some turnips in there too, which is again going to seed. I'm not sure whether those cross with each other. But we'll probably find out. Also in this garden we've got, this is a chicory. I think it's the curly endive, which produce beautiful purple flowers. There's some more ladybirds on there. I do have to watch it a little bit with letting all of this wilderness grow. That's a blackberry that I'll have to get out of here. And this is some tree species that I don't really need growing in my veggie garden, so I'll be removing that shortly as well. So while there's plenty of wildness in the garden, you can see that there's still plenty to eat. We've got plenty of lettuce greens, some celery, fennel, radishes, beetroot, carrots, spring onions, heaps of stuff that I can still drag out of the ground. But to ensure I've got continued food going into summer, I'm going to do some planting today. But first, we're going to look after the broad beans. Here are my broad beans, and they're growing really well. We've got some beautiful flowers coming on them now. I have already got some support on them. I've pounded in some steel posts, and I've just used some of this sheep fencing that I had spare, and it seems to be holding these plants up quite well. But some of them are getting a little bit taller, and I think getting another layer of the sheep fencing on will just help to keep them sort of upright. Might also keep them sort of off, keep them from rubbing too much on each of them as the tops sort of get a bit heavier too. So I've just cut my next panel of mesh, and I'm just going to hook it over these posts like I've done before. And I'll just work it down until we get to a level that's going to have these plants shooting up into it. I do find you have to feed the plants through a little bit just to kind of get them heading in the right direction. But that doesn't take long. And there's their next level of support. Now I'm just going to attach it so it kind of doesn't slip down to the post. Now, as the broad beans get taller, I'll be adding more layers of my sheep mesh, but if I find these posts start to pull in, I will just put some bits of timber sort of across in a rectangle form just to hold these apart so they're kind of not dragged in or pulled with the plants as they sort of blow around, and that should make it sturdy enough. But for the moment, that's holding pretty well, and I think that's all I need for my broad beans to keep them growing happily upright. Now to get on to the fun part of planting, and these plants and seeds are what I'm going to use to plant out my new trellises. I've got some cucumber, watermelon and 3 different pumpkins, snow peas and some beans. So let's get started. Now first up for my planting, I've got some Purple King climbing beans, which I'm going to put on my little teepee over the back here. Now I haven't quite finished it yet, but I'll plant these out and make sure in the next week or so to finish that teepee like I've done with this one, which is really quite sturdy. For this teepee, I am going to grow some long cucumbers on it, which should just vine up this beautifully. And hopefully I'll still be able to find the long cucumbers kind of hanging through the middle there. I'm not sure whether it'd stand up to a pumpkin or a watermelon, so I'm going to hold off putting them on my teepees just yet. As I've got this beautiful display of colour at this corner, both the Swiss chard and the California poppy, I'll be planting my cucumbers at the other 2 corners. Now I haven't quite got to updating this bed with a bit of compost yet, but I'll be doing that at the same time as I get that teepee completed. Oh, that soil's a nice colour in here anyway. Now just down here is a pile of compost. That's from my potato bags that I just dumped there, so I'll be using this around my little cucumber. And the other one should do great buried in here with all the compost. And just a little bit of water. Now, right next door with this teepee, I'm just going to mark out some lines with a little stick, just to give us a bit of an idea of where we want to plant these bean seeds. They're getting a bit overshadowed by these flowering cauliflower plants, but by the time the bean seeds shoot out of the ground, I think that plant should be just about finished, so we'll be able to clear that out and give these beans plenty of space to grow. So I'll just spread them out, and using another stick I'm just going to put them down in the ground a couple of centimetres. So that's this teepee planted out with our beans. I will just come through and put a layer of compost on top. The beans still won't be too far down, and I'll do it before they come up so it's a lot easier just to cover the surface of the ground. But we'll get this teepee a lot sturdier before those beans start to grow. Right next to my teepee structure, I've got a trellis that I put up a couple of years ago, and I usually grow my snow peas and cucumbers. Snow peas early in the season, cucumbers later. But I think I'll give the watermelon a bit of a try. This is fairly sturdy, so I should be able to make a bit of a sling to hang the watermelon up on the trellis should I have to. I just didn't have confidence in my teepee structures to hold up some large watermelons, so we're going to give this one a go. Around each of them, I've just added a handful of our compost. And this is the next one we're going to be planting out. I'm going to try growing some pumpkins up my arch, and I'm going to plant some snow peas on the screen door part. Now these little peas that are already there are just a potting variety, and they don't climb. So I'll be just putting my snow peas sort of along the bottom of the door so they can make the most of this beautiful mesh. I'll just put quite a few actually. Give it a better chance of some taking off. This little pumpkin seed is a Jap nut. I've got a Turk's turban, so that would be an interesting pumpkin to grow. And this one is a Australian butter pumpkin. These 3 seeds I got from a friend, Kathy, at Little Garden Big Dreams. So thanks again, Kathy. They've produced beautiful seedlings. So I'm going to try, I think, the Turk's turban in my arch trellis. There. It's 1 in, 2 and 3. The other 2 pumpkin varieties I'm going to plant on these 2 frames. This one will need a bit more shoring up, so I'll plant and then make sure I do something about that before they get too heavy on there. Usually I plant pumpkins out sort of beyond the garden so they can sprawl everywhere. But if we're going to have a really hot, dry summer, I don't generally water out there. I might give the garden area a little bit of water, and it's also had plenty of compost and wood chips on it to retain moisture better than that area beyond. So if it's hot and dry, I won't be watering pumpkins, which means they won't really thrive very well. But if I've included them within my garden, then they've got a much better chance of surviving, dry conditions. But before I get to planting, I think I need to clear some space. I kind of forget how far radishes spread. They're beautiful flowers, but they do take up a lot of space. So we're just going to chop away and create some space so we can put these plants in. And that's all I need to get a little plant in and growing. I'm going to put the Australian butter pumpkins on this trellis. And I might just clear around the leg of this ladder. There's not so much sort of climbing support, so we might have to just wind it up the leg. I'm just going to plant it on this side, and it should get plenty of morning and early afternoon sun. We're kind of getting into the later afternoon at the moment, so it's in the shade, but should be adequate for it to get going. Now I've just got to do the same for our Jap pumpkin. I've got 3 seedlings, but I'm just going to put 2 here. I really don't want them sort of taking off around my garden. So I'll contain the number just to make sure. The soil is looking really dark and lovely. We've had a bit of rain lately, which helps. And the worms in there are loving it. Okay, and that's our japsin. The last thing I want to do in the garden today is get these Thai chili plants in. Now I have bought these seedlings as I didn't have any seeds, so I'm going to get those into the ground now. I'm hoping the weather will start to warm. I'm just going to clear sort of this end of the garden and plant these 4 plants in, and it'll also give me a chance to throw in some basil seeds sort of over the coming week and just add to this little garden down the end here. So I'm just going to get in here and clear out of the plants that I can. This here is a frilly mustard that I often use in salad mixes and sometimes in stir fries. I don't need this many seeds. They're not quite ripe yet, but I'm going to cut off most of the plant and maybe just leave a few down below to grab some seeds from down the track, but I'll get most of it out the way. So that's removed a lot of those seeds, but we still have plenty here, which are kind of out of the way of the garden, to leave to ripen and harvest down the track. These other plants are just frilly mustards as well, so I can get rid of those. Now I'm just going to get in here carefully with my fork. I've got to leave this plant here, but there are some parsnips here which I'd like to remove. And there's a few more in here, so here we go again. The garden's all cleared except for a couple of parsnips, which I'll leave in as I've already got plenty harvested. The mustard plant is right out of the way. Now I just need to add some compost on top as there's really nothing left on this garden bed. Luckily, the pile is right next door. With that compost on, it kind of defines the garden a little bit better. You can see there's a bit of grass growing into the path and this plant in the way too. But once that plant is gone, I'll be updating all that wood chip, and so the path will be a lot more evident. Now, just to get all my little plants into the ground. Now we just need some consistent warm weather and we'll have some beautiful chilies. Well, that's our visit to the veggie garden all done. I'm really pleased to have made a start with some of my summer plantings, and I'm just hopeful that the warm weather comes. I hope you've enjoyed having a look around. Thanks so much for watching, and bye for now.